G'day all, Farmer Gregie here. Now I've got to say I'm excited because I am about to watch The Game Changers. It is going to change the world, no question. All the vegans are saying that they're converting people to this way of life because it's the only way of life. Although, just as I hit play, the very first thing I read before the movie starts, it actually says, the statements expressed in this film are not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Awesome. We're off to a flyer. Pretty much disregard whatever's coming as professional medical advice. But that's okay. I'm just going to... So I'm actually watching real time as I'm giving some commentary. I'm just going to keep on hitting pause and coming back to the next thing when I get there. So I'll be back. Okay, I'm a couple of minutes in and the opening credits with a song that says, I'm a champion, I'm a killer, I'm a savage. I've been that way since the beginning. Awesome, good stuff. This is a peace-loving vegan documentary, but I'll come back to the relevance of that fairly soon. Okay, so we've just got the opening credits out of the way and we're going to focus on the bloke who's the driving force behind this, which is a fellow by the name of James Wilkes. And he has been teaching combat manoeuvres for over 15 years to the US Marines, the SWAT teams, the Navy SEALs. So fantastic. Peaceful, loving vegan that's been teaching combat manoeuvres to secret services and armed forces. So, okay, I can totally get the parallel there with where we're heading, maybe. So most of the manoeuvres that James Wilkes is teaching are banned in mixed martial arts. He says that this is life or death for the people who he's teaching it to, and he's honoured to be able to share that with them. So he is training humans to be killing machines. Yes, it's life or death, which means if you don't stay alive, you're dead. But that also means that you are going to intentionally kill another human. That's how war works, right? But this is the background of this peaceful, loving vegan. Okay, I've got to say I'm a bit confused already, but I'll see if it takes us somewhere else. But Wilkes then said that he had a background in martial arts because he was a problem child. So his parents wanted him to learn discipline. But despite learning all of what he learnt, he was bashed as a teenager. He learnt that Bruce Lee had the same thing happen to him when he was a teenager. So he looked into Bruce Lee's philosophy and learnt from Bruce Lee and put that into practice. So I don't know if Bruce Lee was ever a vegan or not. I'll see if they tell us as we watch. I guess if I don't bring Bruce Lee up again, then that means they never referred to him being a vegan. They just talked about his philosophy, and that was all about fighting, not food, by the way. Bruce Lee's philosophy was all about fighting. No mention of any food. Okay, so Wilkes went on to win a title as the Ultimate Fighter. And then after that happened, he was he had a serious injury and he did ligament damage to both of his knees, sparring with a future heavyweight champion. So he then proceeded to spend 1,000 hours apparently researching peer-reviewed science, how to recover and get back to being able to train, teach and compete as quickly as he could. So this led him to the Gladiators, which I've been hearing quite a bit about the Gladiators. And I don't know, I guess they're going to keep referring to peer-reviewed science, but But his expert here on the gladiators said that there was only one burial site where there were mass burials of the gladiators in one site, and that was in Turkey. So, of all the different places that gladiators used to fight back in the days of the Roman Empire, we're going to look at exhumed bones from one site. So I guess this should be fairly conclusive. You know, we can assume that all around the world, you know, or at least across Europe at the time, it'll be the same story for all gladiators. So I'll just see where we head with this one. I'll come back. Yep. Okay, so we spoke to one expert about 68 bodies that were exhumed in one site, and the theory behind what they were going to find was that if there was high levels of strontium in the bones, that would indicate a vegetarian or plant-based diet, and they're going to burn the bones, and if the flame turns blue or red or... So even the expert that they spoke to said that because of the tests that they did on this one site with 68 gladiators, it appeared they were predominantly vegetarian. Not vegan, vegetarian. Now, I get the impression that this is going to become a strong theme through the movie, because then we go back to James Wilkes and he says, wow, this blew my mind, that all that I thought I knew about nutrition, and it turns out that the gladiators were on a plant-based diet. Like, already we're talking plant-based. We're not saying vegan, and plant-based can have up to 20% animal products. Plant-based does not mean vegan, for a start. James Wilkes then suggested that the gladiators were the highest trained with access to the best medical help in the Roman Empire. Really? Did his research uncover that these highly prized fighters got the best medical help of all the people that were alive in that era? My understanding of the gladiators are that they were prisoners of war. They were effectively slaves of their master. Their life was valued lower than an animal. I mean, they had a lower value than an animal that the Romans of wealth would eventually eat. So I'm just going to keep on watching where this thread heads. But to be honest, my reading of the truth about the gladiators is that they were treated worse than animals in their day. And this documentary is already suggesting we should be like the gladiators. I think that's kind of sad, don't you? But I think James Wilkes is hinting at the fact that we should be treating vegans worse than we treat animals. Well, I wouldn't do that. I think vegans are still humans, and we shouldn't mistreat them. Okay, so now we're just up to the McGregor-Diaz fight, and we're going to go into a bit of a backstory before we get to the results of this fight, no doubt. But I've had a couple of spoiler alerts here that I think are very relevant. So they've made a big deal about the fact that McGregor eats steak for breakfast, lunch and tea, and Diaz is plant-based. Again, plant-based, not vegan. So James does some research, because the whole, you know how boxing works, and these guys are UFC fighters. So, you know, there's the whole in-your-face leading up. McGregor is taunting the fact that Diaz eats vegetables, and I'm a lion and he's a gazelle. So there's all of the usual stuff going on. in the pre-fight. But they've hinted in this particular documentary that Diaz was a late replacement for the McGregor fight because McGregor was going to fight someone else who pulled out. So Diaz only had 11 days to prepare. What they didn't actually say was that McGregor had been shedding weight to fight in 155-pound category, and Diaz actually weighed 170 pounds. So with 11 days to go before the fight, McGregor is now trying to bulk up to fight a fair fight against a bloke who weighed 15 pounds more than him. 15 pounds, that's like 7 kilograms. So that's a substantial advantage in a fight. Now, if you're trying to lose weight fast or put weight on fast, that's probably not going to do a lot for your levels of energy and strength. So that happened before this fight. And we haven't got to the result of the fight yet. I know how that plays out. I'll come back to that in a moment. But this led Wilkes to wonder, are there any other plant-based athletes excelling around the world? And so he did a search for plant-based, not vegan. I've also learnt, since I'm watching this right now, but Diaz is not a vegan. He has said that he eats lots of eggs. Now, if anybody eats eggs or dairy, that is providing animal products, animal fats, animal proteins that are not available in plants. So it's a pretty big stretch already to be talking about this elite athlete that's plant-based being a vegan when that's actually not true. Okay, so they looked at this elite endurance runner, Scott Jurek, who went on to break a new world record. Again, he was plant-based. I don't think he at any point referred to the word vegan. And you won't see it in this movie, but the record that he broke a few years ago has since been broken by 5 days, like not 5 hours, because he was running effectively 2 marathons a day. That was a massive effort to do that. I don't care what you're eating, that's a massive effort. But his record mark that was set, 3 years ago, has been broken by 5 days since then by a meat eater, not a vegan or a vegetarian. So we then started to look at the history of all these athletes over time that had been Olympic gold medalists, and they kept referring to them as plant-based and, a meat-free diet. But it was always vegetarian. Like, does James Wilkes not understand the difference between vegan and vegetarian? I'm pretty sure he does. So they were highlighting different athletes, including our own Murray Rose, who was sticking to a vegetarian diet, which almost certainly means he was eating eggs and dairy, not meat as such. And then the last one, they just looked at Carl Lewis, becoming vegan, breaking the world record, performing the best times he ever had at the age of 30. And then guess what happened to Carl Lewis? He broke down and his career ended, like just after he turned vegan. And he's actually the first person, I'm watching this and we're nearly a quarter of an hour into the movie, and he was the first person that literally said the word vegan. Interesting. So then we came to another Aussie, Morgan Mitchell, who was the Australian champion 400 metre runner, represented Australia at the 2016 Olympics. And again, she had turned vegan, was saying about all these things that were happening that were positive. And what they don't go on to say in this movie, which is what I've seen from some of the other commentaries that have debunked the movie, is that Morgan Mitchell is unable to beat college athletes in America now. So it may have worked briefly, but it didn't actually prolong her career she didn't be, she wasn't able to keep performing at that same level. So, American cyclist Dotsie Bausch then tells us how she became vegan and turned into a machine. Like, she used to leg press 300 pounds, but after she became a vegan, she started pressing 585 pounds. So she was already a champion cyclist before she turned into a vegan, and then she started leg pressing almost double. Well, if she was already winning American titles and then she could do double the leg press, why did her times not improve so much on the bike that she became the world champion? She did compete at the 2012 Olympics and win the silver medal. But shouldn't leg presses translate to cycle speed? Very scientific. Very scientific. I'm just looking at the science aspect of that. Certainly makes for riveting viewing. So then James was confused about how we don't need meat. He's finding out all these things. So he reached out to a team physician who had won 2 titles, Dr. James Loomis, who had won a World Cup in baseball and a Super Bowl. And Dr. James goes on to explain how protein doesn't have to come from meat. The cows, the sheep, the pigs, the chickens, they're just the middleman. The protein originally comes from the plants that those animals eat. So his theory is we can just eat the plants, right? But that's actually not even true. The protein doesn't come from the plants. The protein comes from the soil. So this is science that's been debunked. It's a joke to say that the animals are the middleman. The animals are no more the middleman than the plants. According to him, if you want to go straight to the source and get your protein, then eat some dirt. That's where it all comes from. All of our protein, all of our nutrients come from the soil. So get out in your back garden and, take a spoon with you and just dig in. Moron. So this bit I love, James Wilkes has just said that all the athletes we're looking at so far have just been lean athletes because we're looking at speed and endurance. So where are the big guys? And then we go to Kendrick Farris, who was the only American to represent the USA at the 2012 and 16 Olympics. And he became a vegan. Again, this stuff you won't find in the movie, but I've seen the actual numbers shared by a number of people. And in a lower weight category, when he was at the 2008 Olympics, he literally lifted more weight than when he was a heavier athlete. And yes, sure, he was a bit older, but as we know, when you watch weightlifting, age is not a barrier. Quite often they are still very competitive until a bit later in life. So it's not like the young guys beat the old guys when it comes to weightlifting. And he was, making a big deal about the fact he became vegan. And it's like we're supposed to believe that he's now doing better than he did as a non-vegan. Well, he did in his first month or 2 as a vegan. But then a year or 2 later, he broke down, became injured, and has stopped competing. I don't even know if he's still a vegan, but he stopped competing as a vegan. He sustained injuries that ended his career. And Kendrick makes the comment that, man, I should have done this a long time ago. But for 90% of his life, he was not a vegan. So he built his entire base of strength by not being a vegan. I just find that amazing that they don't understand that they became who they were as an omnivore or carnivore, and very short term might see a benefit from a vegan or vegetarian diet, which is effectively a detox. It's a detox. You're cleansing your system, but it's not sustainable long term. It's a very short term detox. It's probably going to be the biggest laugh of this doco, but Patrick Baboumian's next. You know, Patrick Baboumian is one of the world's strongest men. Apparently, he holds a whole heap of world records, but he's never actually competed in the world's strongest man, which, you know, is a tournament in its own right. And they quote him saying, "People ask me, how can you be as strong as an ox and you don't eat meat?" And he says, "Have you ever seen an ox eating meat?" Oh, that's kind of funny, isn't it? So for those of you that don't know your anatomy real well, cattle are ruminants, and their small intestine is about 20 times the length of their body. And yes, all they eat is plants. They're herbivores, they're ruminants. And the human small intestine is only about 3 times as long as our body. So, what a bizarre comment to make. Maybe he should be chewing his cud like an ox, if he's as strong as an ox. Because that's what they do, isn't it? Ruminants have 4 stomachs. They swallow the food, they spit it back up, and then they chew it some more. As humans, we don't tend to do that. I don't think it'd taste real good if we spit it back up and have a bit more of a chew on it. Do you? Okay, so they say in the film that Patrick says himself he stopped eating meat in 2005, and he became heavier and stronger after that. It's slightly misleading because he didn't actually become a vegan until 2011. And this is where all the smoke and mirrors happens around veganism, suggesting that if you're plant-based, you're vegan. He literally became plant-based in 2005 and didn't become a vegan for another 6 years. And then he broke a couple of world records just after he became a vegan, and effectively in less than 2 years of being a vegan, I think. So I just went to the wiki page while I'm having a look on Wikipedia here and looking at his different accomplishments. He probably hasn't done a lot over the last 4 or 5 years, and effectively, stopped competing. I think one of the frustrating things they don't mention unless it's coming, I'm going to keep watching, but he has admitted to using steroids, as so many of those strongmen competitors do. So let's eat plants and use steroids. Like, that's a really healthy way to go about breaking world records, isn't it? Strange. Oh dear. So then we're going to move on from Patrick Baboumian to another big boy, Bryant Jennings. World heavyweight contender, boxer. So again, I've just paused the movie and I've gone and had a quick look at Wiki because I'm curious. He's making a big deal about the fact that he's a vegan, and why didn't he know all this stuff sooner? As a professional boxer, he had won 19 consecutive bouts. 19. The last 2 of them after he turned vegan. He then proceeded, and remembering that often when people turn vegan, they might feel a bit of a health benefit right at the start. I'm talking inside a year. But then less than 2 years after he had turned vegan, he proceeded to lose 4 of his next 9. And from what I can see here, the last 2 fights he's fought, he lost this year. So I don't know. Doesn't seem like a real good advertisement for the way to enhance your performance as an elite athlete. To go from 100% record 19-0 to only be able to win a bit over half of your next 9 fights. I'm just an observer here. I'm just looking at real results. This is not about science, just cause and effect.